Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
I'm sure you've heard it a gazillion times that all couples fight. Even happy couples fight. And in fact, if you aren't fighting, one of you isn't being honest. And the corollary to this is that it's really okay to fight as long as you learn to fight fair, or in some cases, some professionals suggest fighting naked. It's best to continue to hash it out because it's not good to go to bed angry. And I'm not kidding. This is the advice that's out there, and I'm going to tell you it is dead wrong. Good communication is not the panacea for a happy relationship. It's just impossible to have a good one without it. And good communication does not involve fighting, not even fair fighting. So, yes, once again, the topic of the show will be communication, specifically addressing the toxic communication style that my guest, Matt Frey, calls the same fight. Matt is a relationship coach, and he blogs at Must Be This Tall to Ride. So, Matt, thanks for coming back on the show and talking about this ever-popular and ever-challenging topic.
Thank you, Leslie. Flattered to be back.
So, again, I read your blog posts every week. I love them. And you wrote a recent post called Break the Toxic Communication Habits with STFU method, or otherwise known as shut the fuck up method, where you identify this idea of the same fight concept. So can you define what that is?
Yeah, I almost in a tongue-in-cheek way call what I perceive to be an observable pattern among the vast majority of couples, the same fight. It doesn't mean every couple has an identical fight. It means the same fight exists in an individual couple, and it tends to be unique maybe from other people's, but it's their own unique brand of toxicity that just reappears over and over again. And everybody listening who's in a long-term relationship probably knows exactly what we're talking about. That they always start the same, and they feel the same, and they develop the same patterns, and before you know it, she's thinking, my God, this man doesn't get it, and he's thinking, oh no, she's mad at me again, I did something wrong, and that's the same fight, and it's sort of funny until years of it. Yeah, until years of it breaks your relationship, like really slowly.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting because I'll talk with my clients about this, and I can say to them, I said, you can tell me exactly what you're in your same fight. You can tell me everything that your partner is going to say to you before they say it. And your partner can do the same thing because you just keep running the same scenario over and over and over again. It's Einstein's definition of insanity because somehow you expect a different result. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but it seems to play out this way. So what is that dynamic? How does it show up?
Well, I think you will have observed this in your work, the same as I have in my limited sort of experience with it working with others. But really, this all started because, for any of your listeners who don't know, this all began because I made all of these crucial mistakes in my marriage and then got divorced, even though I didn't want to, and it was a very bad time. And then I had to I needed for self-preservation reasons to figure out why my relationship got so unhealthy, why it broke, why I ended up divorced, despite, philosophically really caring and not wanting my marriage to fail. So in the process of figuring it out over a couple of years of writing about it and thinking about it and reading about it and talking to everybody I could about it, I sort of identified the same fight pattern in my relationship. And what I feel I've learned over the past 6-7 years of thinking about and writing about this that I didn't understand at the beginning is that these are two people who are not, very rarely, are they trying to harm one another. I mean, these are people who voluntarily entered marriage, and they say, I love you, and they mean it. and they understood the stakes and they got married. They're like, this is a lifelong commitment with one another. And people who enter that kind of relationship just do not, as a general rule, intentionally try to sabotage it. It's very bad, right? When your marriage is bad, it's very bad when your marriage breaks.
Right, and unfortunately, because of this pattern that you're about to describe, people start then to think that their partners are doing this on purpose and with the intent to hurt them.
That's right. And so I'm going to make some generalizations here. I don't like to make generalizations because sometimes people feel like, well, that doesn't apply to me. I just think we can observe this to be true most of the time, but it tends to materialize as the wife, the female. It doesn't have to be a marriage, but the female in a long-term relationship approaching her male partner and sharing with him a story about her day, or perhaps some concern about life, or maybe specifically about the relationship. And then,
or maybe even potentially something the partner is doing that is bothersome.
And while the man, and again, I'm leaning on my own experience because this is the very thing I was guilty of, as she's describing all this stuff to him, he's like, well, she sees this differently than I do. I'm now going to explain to her this sort of better way to think about what happened so she doesn't have to feel bad about it. Or he agrees with the events that happened, but he then explains to her how, but what happened doesn't rise to enough importance for you to have to feel bad about it. You're overreacting. You're letting it bother you when you shouldn't.
You're too sensitive.
Right? Yes. And I think it's especially bad when he's essentially defending his own behavior, right? That's like almost the worst form of this in the context of invalidating your partner and sort of doubling down on what is often something painful that she's describing. And then to either feel as if your husband doesn't support you, or worse, to feel as if your husband is demonstrating an inability to understand why it hurts, or that he's more or less saying this is going to keep happening over and over again. Because he's just not grasping this idea that, some suggestion
that it's problematic, right? Yeah, that it's a problem.
If he doesn't agree that it's bad, then you can be pretty sure he's probably going to do it again. And so begins the cycle that will last months and years for a lot of people until the relationship gets very bad or one of them chooses to leave it. Often both. And I think it's really sad because again, I feel as if both people fully understood what was happening, kind of on a macro level, that they wouldn't do that they'd make better choices if they had a crystal ball.
Well, or as I like to tell people, if they've taken a Relationship 101 class, which I keep thinking people should have to do that before they graduate from high school. But yeah, I mean, and part of this, and I know that one of the ways, I mean, we met because I found your blog. And I've kind of gotten on you over the time about, it's not always the guy's fault that women have their own blinders on as well that contribute to this toxic interaction, this toxic conversation, this same fight. Because in reality, if one person can do something different, then it can change the pattern. But again, it's the not knowing, it's the not understanding, it's the, well, I don't understand why this matters so much to you. It shouldn't, my least favorite word in the English language, should. It shouldn't be that big of a deal, as opposed to, oh, this is a big deal. And I frequently like to use the analogy of how we deal with our children. Now, I do remember, very vividly my father saying to me that if I didn't stop crying, he'd give me something to cry about. It's like, okay, if I'm crying, I'm obviously thinking I'm having something to cry about. But it's somewhat of that idea, and I swore to God I would never say that to my children, and I never did. They're both adults, so I got away. But it's that same kind of idea that if you wouldn't say it to your child, why would you say it to your spouse? And because we don't always understand why our children are hurt, but we don't want them to be hurt. So we try, so we listen to them. You know, we we listen to them when they cry about the monster in the closet or whatever, you know, or the friend who's mean to them or whatever it is. But we somehow don't give our partners that same grace.
No, that's true. I wonder, again, not to pick on the guys, but I wonder if there would sometimes maybe be a correlation between a husband who does not engage in a healthy way in these conversations with his wife as being the same kind of dad who might say, you know, no, son, you know, there's nothing to be afraid of, and or just not take seriously the concerns of the child because, you know, again, through the prism of quote-unquote adulthood, he or she knows that it's no big deal, but it doesn't change the very real feeling that the child's feeling in that moment. Mm-hmm. I don't like to like juxtapose like childhood necessarily with a wife. I don't want to sound condescending or insulting in any way. But the dynamic to me is the same. And so the reason I tend to, I don't want to say pick on guys, but the reason I tend to put the onus on men as a general rule to help with this is because I perceive in this really common scenario for the wife to be experiencing pain, very physical, real, measurable pain that the husband is blind to. Mm-hmm. And so the husband is maybe mistreated in conversation a little bit, or maybe there's some missteps in the communication on the part of his wife, but he tends not to be hurt, not in the everyday sense. In the dinner table conversation, I think the wife is commonly feeling pain from the way her husband is treating her. And I think that the husband's quote-unquote pain comes much later when his wife starts emotionally withdrawing from him and, you know, the relationship starts to take a turn, which sometimes happens, you know, 500, 1,000 conversations later.
Right. And
that's
I
why
like that.
I don't like the idea of pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that clarification because I do think that's true, and I think part of the reason is that men aren't quite as in touch with their pain as women are, because from the time they were little kids they were told, suck it up, it doesn't hurt, just get back in the game. And so I think a lot of times it's more about ignorance than it is ill intent, but the impact of the pain is exactly the same. It doesn't really matter how the pain arrived, it still hurts.
That's right. And I spent years acting like my wife shouldn't be very mad at me because I was doing everything by accident, not taking into account, you know, this idea that, you know, if you flail a knife blindly in the dark and you start cutting people, if you keep doing that over and over again, no matter how accidental the wounds are, people are still being hurt by it. And it took me a while for me to make that connection, much too late.
So this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking toxic communication with relationship coach and blogger Matt Frey. And if you're like most couples, you do some version of the same fight. Maybe you do it often and your marriage is suffering. The question you might want to ask is, how's that working for you? How do you feel in your marriage right now? And what do you think will happen if you keep doing the same old thing? So I would like to offer an alternative, the opportunity to move past the same fight and into a more connected and sustainable relationship. So if you're interested, just send me an email or give me a call and schedule your Happily Ever After transformation session. And you can reach me at area code 919-924-0463. Again, 919-924-0463. Or you can send me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And isn't it time for something different? Now, we're going to find out from Matt what his STFU, shut the fuck up method is, and how it works. So take it away.
You're very funny. I didn't know we were going to say the actual word.
Well, you know.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. If I offended anybody, too bad.
Fair enough. So, what's interesting to me about what we've been talking about with the guys is that I don't think there are. I want to be careful. I'm speaking again in broad generalizations. There could be strained relationships with children. Occasionally there could be offended people out in the world. But generally speaking, I don't think the average guy has significant negative consequences from this behavior that will end his marriage, just as a general rule. And that is this: his wife is sharing information with him, a story, or basically requesting his help with something at home or in the relationship. And then he's responding in these sort of classic and validating ways that cause pain. He can do that with his guy friends. He can do that with his siblings. He can do that with, coworkers, and nothing bad happens to him. It only materializes at his home. Oftentimes these guys are amazing. They're brilliant, and they're successful at work, and they've got tons of friends. The only person in their entire life that ever complains about them is the person they married and share all their resources with, like give all their money to.
So obviously it must be her fault, because nowhere else in his life is it a problem.
But she's the statistical outlier. She is the one that's not like everybody else. I think it's really easy to see how some guys dismiss that. It sounds awful, but I sort of get it in a math way. So one of the first things I talk to the guys about is I really don't want to put them on the defensive. I don't think it's a character flaw. They've spent their entire lives doing this, and there isn't anything inherently wrong with it in like a moral way. It's not morally reprehensible. It's not a character flaw. It just so happens that when you do things a certain way in a marriage, it can be it's sort of proven that it can be bad in like a John Gottman statistical analysis kind of way. And I'd equate it with like smoking pot recreationally in California versus Oklahoma. In one place, nobody bats an eye. In another place, you can get arrested. The exact same behavior in a certain set of circumstances are not treated the same. So what is okay in 99% of your life situations is maybe just not okay in the context of your relationship. And it can be very difficult to sort of communicate that effectively. But once the guy understands the SCFU method is learning how to pause this inclination, this instinctive gut reaction to start challenging his wife's interpretation of what happened, or to stop judging or evaluating her emotional reaction to it. Because it tends to be one of those things. He tends to disagree with her retelling of the story, or he tends to disagree with her level of emotional reactivity to it. He thinks like one of them are wrong, and then he shares that. And it's in an honest, earnest, reasonably well-intentioned way that can cause enormous pain for his wife, particularly when it's happening over and over again for years.
Well, and before I let you further discuss the method, I want to go back and ask or highlight something that you said, and I was a little bit flip about it, and I didn't mean to be, but it was this idea that the one person who is hurt is the person he promised to love, honor, and cherish. And, and so she's the outlier, but this is what makes marriage different. Marriage isn't the same thing as your job. It's not the same thing as hanging out with your friends. It's not even the same thing as parenting. It's sort of all of those things and more. And, we are usually, and especially in good relationships, we are much more open and emotional and vulnerable with our life partner than we are with our coworker, or even now. I think that men can be with maybe lifelong friends, that they can be more open. But usually, if you're just shooting hoops or having a beer with your buddies, you're generally not getting into the kind of thing that you get into when you're sharing your life with somebody. And that may be what maybe men are missing, is that they're just kind of going, well, everybody else in my life thinks I'm great, and here's this person who's just tearing me down all the time.
That's right.
Yeah. So I wanted to get that out there. Now continue to talk about how guys can get out of this.
So, all right. So the first step when I'm talking to a guy that I recognize as being exactly like I was in my marriage, which I perceive to be very bad, is I want to see him as I want to give him the benefit of the doubt on his character and on his intellectual capabilities and his intentions and all these things. So my first step is to say, okay, can you see how you can be a very good person and sort of blindly, thoughtlessly be inflicting pain on your spouse? And we have to kind of talk through these nuanced conversations about how invalidation can be so painful for someone else. And that's really tricky a lot of times, because they feel as if they have this grasp on objective truth, on objective reality, and that their wife is somehow, like a slave to just the emotional whims of the moment, and that it's relative truth. I've actually had people say that to me, that that they're like, I want to talk about objective versus relative truth, and shouldn't objective truth outweigh that? And it's a really murky conversation. I don't know if you're on end of that.
Oh, I do. And what I basically tell people is, now, if we are talking objective facts, like it's 65 degrees outside, and we have like 10 thermometers that all say it's 65, that's an objective fact. Now, here's the question: is it warm or cold? And that's usually and guys are actually really not talking about objective truth. Almost, and it's not just guys. All of us are mostly talking about subjective truth, which means which means both people can be right.
No, that's brilliant. The follow-up question, is it warm or cold, is absolutely brilliant. I get it. And so that's it. And we talked about it with the little kid earlier. The little kid who thinks a monster's under his bed. It doesn't matter that there isn't a monster under his bed. If he's terrified, how does the objective truth of no monster being there comfort him, or help him stop crying or stop being afraid or whatever? There's a very real condition the child in that case is experiencing that if you love that person, I would think you would want to help them overcome. Anyway, the same is true in our adult relationships. If somebody feels bad, it's almost irrelevant whether they should or shouldn't feel that way. To me, the loving reaction, leading with comforting them, supporting them, demonstrating genuine care and concern for their state of being and their general well-being, is a great first step. And I feel like when these guys, and again, it's not always guys, it's just mostly guys, at least that I'm working with and talking to, when they lead in this way, when they are quiet. So the STFU is like, don't do the thing you always do, where you challenge the facts of the story, or where you are trying to explain in a different way your wife's experience. What if you just cared that she felt bad, that she was afraid, that she was stressed, that she was embarrassed, that she was any number of things? She told you she felt a certain way, and instead of making a judgment about it, just care. Just care. And then I really do think some productive conversations can happen after the fact, where you can, in a nuanced, loving, mutually supportive way, have a conversation about whether there might be a better way of sort of rethinking it or dealing with it. But the time is not then and there when your wife is coming to you, trying to connect with you emotionally because you're the person she loves and trusts and wants to share her life with. So she's sharing these invisible parts of herself, and then when that gets thrown back in her face, or it gets twisted to make her feel like she's less than, I really can understand how that can damage an individual, and eventually the entire relationship breaks down. Even though the guy's not necessarily trying to do any of that. It often is happening in his blind spots with just no awareness, right? This is a guy that's constantly surprised by his wife's dissatisfaction with him.
Exactly.
And it's not an act. He really is surprised. He's like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong.
Exactly. And one of my little pet things is to try to move people past or out of the concept of right and wrong, because And I know that that's where people like to be. I mean, we like it's this way or it's that way. It's it's your yes, no, right, wrong, good, bad, and it's like that's where people get caught up, and it's about being able to see, or maybe not even see, but just accept that you and your partner can experience the exact same thing completely differently. And so it's, I'm always interested when I talk with my couples. Well, they'll come in and I'll say, well, so how have things been since you were in last, or since we last talked? And they'll say, and one person, and it's frequently the guy, oh, they've been great. And I look at the woman, and it's like, I don't think so. But it's that same kind of thing that the guy go, well, we only had one fight. And the woman will go, yeah, we had one fight. And it's like they agree that they had one fight, but he's thinking, oh, it was, so I'm like,
Yeah, it's exactly right. I think symbolically your fabulous question about whether 65 degrees is warm or cold is sort of perfect, right? It depends on what we're talking about. It depends on the person. We're talking about air. We're talking about water. Everybody responds to hot and cold differently. It happens all the time, right? People being more or less comfortable in certain temperatures. And, to tell somebody that they're wrong for being cold or for being hot is, I don't know, seems fruitless. So
well, and what it actually is, and you were talking about this, it's actually disrespectful. And that, I think, is really what the core of it is that when I don't feel heard, when I share something and, I'm told I'm wrong or however it comes out, that it really is about disrespect, and that's what really kills the relationships. I don't feel heard. I don't feel cared about. I don't feel respected.
Yes, ma'am. The phrase that I was not aware of until maybe 3 or 4 months ago that I've adopted as a bit of a mantra because it just sort of serendipitously kept coming up over and over again is this idea of, and again, broad generalizations, but about a wife or a woman in a long-term romantic relationship, the idea that she wants to be considered are the words that kept coming up over and over again. Multiple people, multiple relationships. I want to be considered. And I thought it was fabulous. And it requires a little bit depth of thought and nuance, but when I think you can help a guy in an average relationship where his wife doesn't feel considered, I think if you ask the right questions, you can help him understand why she doesn't feel considered. In terms of a lot of times in the average relationship, a wife or a mother will feel as if every decision she makes throughout the course of a day is considering her husband and her children if applicable. And the husband often isn't thinking about anything but himself, and very rarely is mathematically factoring his wife's experiences into the equation when making a decision about what to do. Everything from, what time he's going to show up or whether he should text or call about some, little thing that's come up, or tons and tons of things, right? There's countless examples of times in which one member of a couple is considering the experiences of the other. And I do think men, not because they're men, but I think you can observe it more often in men, that they are not considering their partner in the everyday decision. And that state of being, that feeling that I'm not important enough to be considered, is, back to your word, this idea of being disrespected. I feel like that's at the core of so many of these relationships where all of their friends and all of their family would say, these are two great people. From the outside looking in, they have a great relationship. But the two people in the relationship kind of hiding the dysfunction from the rest of the world, like, this is bad. We're totally disconnected, and we're constantly at each other's throats, literally or spiritually. So I just think it's really tragic that good people accidentally find themselves here.
Well, and And you are correct. It is a very definite pattern that happens in many, many relationships. And the way in which it's addressed, and I'm going to call out my own gender on this, is that women don't know how to address it productively. Because you made a statement a long time earlier in the conversation that really struck with me, that there is no cost to a man doing this. And, now ultimately there's a cost, but there's not a high enough price in the moment. And part of that is because women have been taught to back down. They haven't been taught how to bring this up in a productive way. And, when people think about cost, they think about punishment. It's not about punishment. It's about clarity. It's about, how do I say that this is not okay and get you to hear me? So I'm wondering, because you talk in your article about a reframe that helps this, that helps the method succeed. And I'm not sure. I think we've been talking about it a little bit, but can you clearly define what that reframe is?
Absolutely. I perceive it to be within myself, 7, 8, 9 years ago, when I was, doing a very poor job of marriage. And the thing that I try to talk to the guys about in terms of an actionable item, something they can work on. So first you have to get it. So let's, do you agree this is a bad thing that needs to stop? Yes. Okay, good. We can move on to step 2. Step 2 is you now need to form a new habit. You need to stop doing the thing you do all the time, and it never hurts you, right? It's not bad because there's no negative consequences in your other relationships. There's only negative consequences in your marriage. So it's very difficult to be mindful about this. I do defend the guys here. It seems ridiculous, I think, to some people, especially when they're in a relationship and they feel really bad because of the actions or inactions of their partner. To maybe hear me defend this obliviousness that's showing up over and over again, but truly does not have any context, like in his head and heart, for this being a painful, damaging thing that he's doing. So it's like you gotta get him there. I had to get myself there. And so the practical mind trick for me is the thing you always do that gets you into this same fight routine is you judge. You evaluate when your wife's talking to you whether she should feel that way or whether she should believe what she believes. You're instantly judging, whether that's correct or incorrect or right or wrong in your mind, right? Does it align with what you perceive to be the best thing she could think or feel? And then you say that. And what I encourage them to do is just eliminate that entirely. There needn't be judgment. Your approval doesn't matter. Your disapproval doesn't matter. She's saying she's afraid. She's saying she's angry. She's saying she's sad. She's going to feel those things regardless of, how correct or incorrect you think she is. And if you show up for her as a partner who cares that she's sad, that she's afraid, that she's angry, and you're willing to sit in the negative emotion with her just so she knows she's not alone. And then you're willing, to whatever extent you're able to participate in a behavior modification that can take away something that's hurting her or that can introduce some feel-good thing that can, improve her life or the state of her marriage or whatever. To me, that is how you rebuild trust in a strained or broken relationship. That is how you just reinstitute a culture of safety for people who no longer feel safe in their relationship, in their home. And so I think a lot of people hear this and they're like, you're kidding me, right? These random conversations where I think my wife's being ridiculous. That is the root cause of my marriage, falling apart. And I just think it's easily dismissed in the way that his wife's complaints are, and then nothing positive happens. So buy-in is so important.
Yeah, and I think that the point is that that's what you're seeing on the surface. And if you want to think about it like the iceberg, where only 10% of the iceberg is on top of the water, the real damage in your relationship is underneath. And so, yes, that's the thing, because as you talked about before, it's about somebody being seen and somebody being validated and somebody being considered, and that's the stuff that's underneath the water where it's coming out, and many times inartfully on both people's parts. So I think it's you and I do this for a living. I think it behooves people to learn and to be curious, because it's as you said. I don't want my partner to feel this way, but my partner does. So, yes, one option is that they would stop feeling that way, which, okay, lots of luck. The other one is what can happen so they don't feel that way. And then this is where people, like you were talking about, that they can talk about what needs to be different and how, and what might work better. Because that's basically the same thing. If you want to play a better golf game, somebody looks at your game and says, "Oh, you're doing this. Try something else." Oh, okay, thank you. And with marriage, it's but the problem is that the person who's usually telling us is our partner, and somehow, that doesn't seem to always register. So, Matt, can you tell people where they can read your blogs, because they're fantastic? And anything else that you would like to share?
No, thank you. My personal blog is called Must Be This Tall to Ride, which can be found at mustbethistalltoride.com. And then I'm a regular contributor at the Good Men Project. They publish an article every Thursday.
Terrific. So what I want to share, and I may have said this before to you guys, but a colleague once told me that all relationships end in tragedy. And I went, what? And he goes, well, you either die or there's a breakup. And the problem is that far too many relationships are miserable before that final blow. And I know that I don't want to be in that kind of marriage. And if you don't either, are you willing to do something about it? And hopefully one of the things, go read Matt's blog, keep listening to the show. And until next week, stay loving.